My mother often asked, "Who knows best, the one who travels most, or the one who studies much?" I believe we know the right answer to that now. By traveling, we discover more about man's culture, arts and belief systems. My own observation of man's belief systems is by no means an attack on anyone's religious faith, for I am not in opposition to the ideals of creationists, although I have different opinions. However, man's mostly fear-based myths and dreams throughout the ages have led the way to beliefs and religious ideals, which continuously reflect his conflicts about good and evil, truth and falsehood, happiness and sadness. Man considered that these aspects of the human being had to be dependent on an unknowable decision-maker, completely divorced from his own mind, thus giving the founders of self-made beliefs authority to control the minds of the masses. Experience shows that when one can control the minds of others, one can also control the population as a whole. More control leads to more power to religious leaders of great intelligence, but total ignorance about people's individuality and their natural inventiveness. The majority of those leaders, as they have been known throughout the centuries, are forever hungry for more power and in need to collect more worshippers. While many are ever ready to sell shadows through their Sunday morning preaching, most of their congregations simply leave the thinking to someone else, allegedly more knowledgeable. Religious beliefs have further fostered superstitions, which were based upon man's passions and fears. Superstitious belief is always built upon blind faith and accepted without question. If such an important issue is questioned, it may be considered by the majority of religious groups as if it is questioning the spirit, which is apparently one of the gravest sins man can commit. This observation is the result of an in-depth study of man's past and evolution of man's religions over the centuries. History needs to remain pure and down to earth. It cannot and should not be interpreted in just one way, but must be studied with the data available and the historic artifacts man has left behind. Alas, those who attempted to describe what they have discovered were either persecuted or murdered in the name of an elusive deity who they were all prepared to die for or be sacrificed to. Man's religions and superstitions became intense diversions, hindering progressive thought. Man's evolution seems to be interrupted, as one can observe through their current trends, and worldwide conflicts based upon religious intolerance. Over the centuries, man has created many gods and eventually chose one who has apparently created them and rested on the seventh day of his creation. If you notice, he is still resting. Strangely, this great one continually interferes with man's evolution, stopping his undertakings as with the Tower of Babel, confusing their tongue as it was written in the past. Remember, he also destroyed those who were allegedly sinning against him through a worldwide flood. But did he not create sin for man to experience? God created man in his perfect image indeed. Consider, for example, the characteristics of nations. This is where we discover a familiar attribute, which is almost like asking someone to hit the other while claiming to be the one hit. Pushing, and claiming to being pushed first. If you ponder upon this, you can see it is just like a child's game. The Holy Scriptures emphasize fear of God to the faithful and teach how jealous that God is. That God always presents very human attributes and is ever ready to punish and hurt his toys. No, this is not a sarcastic remark. Today, if you notice, man apparently worships the same God who created the nations and races under different names. But in reality, man still worships many gods under all kinds of disguises, and indeed, the worst-case scenario is that people are led to believe they are following the one and only God who created heaven and earth. Can it be nothing more than an illusion and grand myth? It is probably a diversion, so that man cannot see the bigger picture. There are also those who regard what is considered here as the workings of the devil, and forget that their devotional thoughts in this regard are equally ugly diversions, so that they cannot think for themselves. Some people prefer to hide behind the curtain of sins, for they have been led to absolute fear in thinking and being free, emphasizing the greatness of a devil and not the love of God. That may also be why Adam and Eve were hiding from God after their sinning. Strangely, it was also created by the same God for which the human world suffered, until this source of all greatness sacrificed his only begotten Son, so that everyone believing in him would have everlasting life. A beautiful story to keep man appeased, while he bends to the control of the leadership. But is this the reality, and who really is the Creator God? However, man is also very clever and capable of considering logic and common sense, for he can be extraordinarily logical and discover that he can no longer stagnate in the darkness of ignorance. His evolutionary processes have helped him to understand the workings of life around him better. Deep down he knows that the gods he worshipped throughout the centuries invented chaos and a vast variety of divisions. Man's creation of monotheism was commendable. However, this one God system has not been any different. In reality, man invented his gods. The God who a majority of humanity worships is a God who discriminates, separates, and punishes. Remember the words of that same greatness? My chosen. He must have created a reason, an excuse for that. The chosen were to teach and lead the world. They were to show the ways of that God, so that all can be like brothers unto each other. They were to lead the nations into one unity and one national identity on a worldwide scale. It sounds fantastic, does it not? But was it not that same God who created confusion by allowing the devil to rule over the world? Was he therefore not the perpetrator of rage, wars, and opposition of all kind? Perhaps man also created the devil, who was to lead people astray. But who was this devil in opposition to God? The Bible appears to contradict itself when one begins to make comparisons between the God of Old Testament and the New. This assumption leads us to conclude that the great God and the fallen ones were of the same source. Jealous, hateful, and unforgiving trends were indeed the characteristics of man's creation of God and the devil, reflecting his own passions. Those gods have introduced sin and punishment to the world, for man apparently needed those tools to lead others and control their every move. God, who allegedly created man, also introduced a grave sin to the world, and later decided to create a Christ identity to wipe off the sins of the world. In this way, Christianity was born. He even created a Holy Trinity, and God the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost were united as one. Man claimed Christ being God Almighty, everlasting Father, and God incarnate, but the Christian world has never known peace and unity, persecuting so-called sinners severely. Mankind never agreed with each other and created more divisions. Remember, knowledge is power, and power is control. Then, this same God created his last great prophet to promote peace in the world. But adherers have never known any peace either. They were, and still are, in opposition to each other. They have fought one another for centuries. God's original chosen, and all the others which followed them, indeed, followed that one God, and all turned against each other. We are no doubt living in a world of many gods, believing them to be the one God who created the heavens and earth. Since it was the accepted truth that the three individual personalities were combined into one singular persona of the Supreme God, as with the Holy Trinity, there was no problem in creating multiple gods in large numbers, united as if one. It is probably better to consider that God created the chaos in the world. Was it all but a gravely wrong interpretation of everything which led to the current human understanding of religious beliefs? Despite my understanding and research in regard to the human dilemma, I choose to remain neutral, respecting people for whatever they elect to believe. Let us also consider the possibilities that there exists something mankind has not yet discovered, but is feeling its presence. This may probably be due to not being ready in their evolutionary progress, and therefore inability to comprehend. During the boat trips, Tony and I had very interesting discussions. Unlike his all-knowing sister, as he put it, he respected others with their education, undertakings, and discoveries. I found one could talk to him about everything intellectual and based upon historic facts. That was indeed refreshing. I discovered that both father and teenage son were more relaxed and calmed as we continued to talk about worthwhile issues. One of the subjects I recall so clearly was about names and identities of people, reflecting their traditional and therefore historic backgrounds. I remember my uncle Gregory, Kirkor in Armenian, also known as Karabet, and my grandmother talking about Karaism at some length. As I understood, many of their associates had practiced it in the past. Much later I discovered that it belonged to an ancient Jewish sect originating in Persia in the 700s AD. In fact, they never accepted the rabbinical traditions and Talmudic authority. Instead, Karaists chose to believe in the literal interpretation of the scriptures. In the Hebrew language, they were known as Karaim. That, I believe, was the reason some of my ancestors adopted the word Kara in their name a long time ago as part of their traditions. I prefer to take this as a theory which may explain why the word was included in our family names, past and present, but it could also be coincidental. Kara is also a very common name used throughout Anatolia for centuries. Long before the First World War, some relatives were from a well-to-do background. Other relatives preferred to use the name Karabetyan, but during the war years, some of the information could have been altered or destroyed, particularly by members of the Ottoman Empire, due to their unending hatred towards infidel Armenians. The center of operations was where most of my distant relatives chose to live, probably France, but later the family was divided into several branches due to marriage, some settling in Greece, and others preferring to stay in western parts of Anatolia, where they had extensive properties when it belonged to Armenia. The ones settling in Anatolia experienced great losses and tragedies during the well-documented slaughter of Armenians in 1915. Fierce battles caused great trauma to both the Ottoman Turks and Armenians. Most of this information I will have to take with a pinch of salt, because unfortunately much of the genuine documentation has been destroyed. The Turks were helped by some other European nations to gain access into Russia an easier way. This created still further hatred towards Armenians, which became an ongoing tradition in that part of the world. Those who chose to stay in Turkey, for they had a historic and traditional connection with the land of their ancestors, disguised their identities or completely changed them in order to survive. Today many are still living in fear of being discovered belonging to the Armenian race. For they know that if discovered, they will be laughed at, endlessly criticized for having infidel names, or even killed. They all live on the edge because some have been wrongly and deliberately accused of illegal activities which allegedly are harmful to the country's stability in the political and religious sense, and have been shot. However, Armenians greatly contributed to the sciences and culture of the country. Although past relations altered their family name to Karabuyukyan in Turkey, it was due to the locals' inability to pronounce foreign names correctly. It may have been due to Armenians' traditional values of blending in and living a life like the locals in any given country. In the Turkic sense, it means son of the black mustache, which sounds like a pirate. According to our uncle and both grandmothers, our father's desire to live and die in Turkey was based upon his hope of regaining at least a portion of the family's former property there. He hoped that one day he could capture part of this ancient wealth, and I believe that some of our relatives are hopeful to do the same even now. However, I feel it is an impossible dream. When I lived with my parents, who felt obliged to stay in that country, I had no choice but attend their schools, while I was continually questioned by the teachers, friends, and other people as to why my parents' names were so unusually different, not sounding Turkish, although they spoke the local language just like native citizens. My father's friends did not identify him with his original name, but by Idris Bey, and my mother they preferred to call with a name which sounded Muslim, Shahin, or Shahende Hanım. Like my brother, I was forced to tell the same when asked, because constantly needing to explain the meaning behind those names became a real drudgery and headache. At least by altering our names, those endless question sessions were not furthered. It was as if we were in need to hide for our crime of being Armenian. When I was living in Turkey, and most certainly under duress, I could not wait until I tasted real freedom to be somebody and live freely in a more democratic system. My father, who was in reality one-track-minded, insisted that only after the conscripted military service of 2 years could I be considered a real man and mature. He also insisted that to become a genuine citizen of Turkey, one had to serve the country. It did not appeal to me to live the rest of my life in a place where I would remain forever an infidel and foreigner. It was a country where I had to answer everybody about my background and forever looked down on, never being given any opportunity to excel for being of Armenian origin, a country where I have constantly been told to go back to where I originated from. Even today, many journalists, performers, musicians, and other professional people of Armenian background live in absolute fear of being discovered. In almost all Middle Eastern countries, people of different ethnicities, different beliefs, cannot survive and be successful in their undertakings if they retain their original identities and do not camouflage their backgrounds. Without being too critical or promoting discrimination against them, this is the only way to survive. In France, however, many family friends like Arakelian, Garabetian or Karapetian, or Aznavourians were happy French citizens, and happier still living far away from that once upon a time homeland. They made beautiful France their home for decades. In fact, Armenians are great travelers and explorers. They blend in with the societies of different ethnicities extremely well, and one would never know the difference between a native citizen of any country and an Armenian. It is said that next to a successful Jew, there can be found a successful Armenian, for both share a common goal, a good foundation in education. My ex-wife and her relatives and close associates comprising of Jehovah's Witnesses have never questioned why I applied for asylum in Germany. Surprisingly, they all prefer to consider me as Turkish. Even though I was married to a German citizen, their authorities suggested that I should go back to the country where I allegedly originated from. This made me feel completely unwanted anywhere, for I had the same experience when in Turkey. My marriage was unimportant to them, and they sent letters to my wife, as I have already detailed elsewhere in this story, warning her against being married to a Muslim who would not recognize the rights of his wife. That was the final straw, and my studying at one of their universities had no value as far as they were concerned. In Turkey, I was an Armenian dog, while in Germany I became a worthless and dirty Turk, as I was often called. I wondered how much of it has influenced my ex-wife and her family. Although I am certain she was knowledgeable about my background, my wife preferred to believe that I was as their authorities chose to consider me. However, I had traveled from Turkey to be free, not because of my disliking them, but because I had to. Did they at all care or consider why I left Turkey? Much later my daughters, following the dictates of a completely unreasonable and unstable mind of someone who only followed the witnesses, chose exactly that identity to be mine, although their mother changed her marital name to something different, probably to the one whom she was in love with after our divorce, and due to her naivety. They continually questioned me about my supposed untruthfulness in regard to my undesirable name, which I had corrected. According to some gossip from their friends, I was apparently hiding from the public face, like a criminal. I honestly believe that, even after what I had tried for many years to explain what the real truth was in regard to my background, which had been totally ignored, I was considered as someone not worth taking note of or listening to, unless I strictly adhered to Jehovah's Witness teachings. Eventually, after speaking of the truth all these years ago, I was excommunicated. As far as they were concerned, I was nothing more than a liar, untrustworthy, even a criminally minded person, or simply insane, for not being a part of their holy organization. I was never a Jehovah's Witness, and therefore never a part of falsehood. I never followed the two-witness rule of justice, nor supported their ways of protecting sexual abuse or pedophilia within their congregations. One thing was certain: they were always right, even though they were often wrong, and I had to be always on the wrong side, even though I could be right. My second daughter is most certainly familiar with what she has been preaching all along. Mom always speaks the truth, and Dad tells many lies. One cannot trust him, and I know when Dad tells lies by looking at his eyes. Had she ever looked into my eyes to know all that? I heard the same from a number of people who knew her well. Were her friends false when telling me what Birgit was saying to them? Were those friends of hers only telling me lies? Was Magda not allowing her children to go house to house with witness elders without realizing she might have been sending them with child sex predators, since the wrongdoers are always protected from scrutiny? Alas, I had my daughter's custody when they were young, although several times they tried to harm me, but I had forgiven them. They told so many stories and made use of their mother's naive state of mind, strengthening her belief in how wicked I was. I suppose they were now following the teachings of the holy book they were encouraged to study. Or were they? With all their endless lies, my daughters were keenly inventing ways to paint me black, because they could not get what they wanted in the most unreasonable manner. It seemed that they made it their only resolve to destroy my reputation and life to please their own Lord and Master, who could not in reality be any other than the devil himself. On all sides and viewpoints, it seems they were, including their mother, members of a fanatical group of cultists, full of untruths. For after all, research points to the one and only direction that witnesses can accept, that is to follow the imaginings of their founders, while thinking they are the only recipients of God's truth. Tony mentioned that there were a few Armenians he knew of living in the islands, and they were mostly in the music or jewelry business. He was fascinated with the American writer best known for plays and stories praising the common man's ability to live a full, happy life in a world of ugly reality. This was William Saroyan, of Armenian origin. According to information available, his very first book was The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, 1934, and later he wrote The Time of Your Life, 1939, The Human Comedy, 1943, and his autobiography, Not Dying, 1963. I believe Tony had thoroughly enjoyed reading them when he was in his teens. Filipinos were very knowledgeable about American literary art. How strange it was that my mother had also introduced me to reading them when I was very young. I had never questioned the origins of the author, but was fascinated with his philosophy. They asked me what the actual meaning behind my name was, obliging me to explain its Sanskrit and Armenian background, just like I have done elsewhere within this literature. One of his Irish friends once told him that there was a word known as Soren. When further researching, I discovered that in the ancient tongue it meant hospitality due to the Lord in Ireland as well as Scotland. No wonder my Scottish and Irish friends have always pronounced my name correctly, while others chose to call me with different names instead, like George, for instance. But I never responded to them, much to their annoyance. He was also familiar with the Danish biochemist who invented the pH system. It explained the acidity levels of certain elements in chemistry. His name was Sorenson. But I had no relationship with him and his name, although I admired his great work in the science of chemistry. However, my name is pronounced exactly like that in the original language. My surname contains historic reality, as it is part of my ancestral background, although it could have been Sorenyan, or simply the son of Soren. The name Sorenson I am identified with means exactly that, and is far better than one which was altered to suit Ottoman standards. I cannot identify myself with Karabükyan, or Karabikjan, or Karabikyan, for it is a distant memory and completely foreign to me. In Turkey, they all insisted calling me with this, and it became a subject of discrimination. I was immediately recognized as being an Armenian dog, and always laughed at as if I was the figure of a nasty joke. My friends promptly advised me to change my name to a more Turkish-sounding name to avoid ridicule. Like my brother, whenever I attended school in that country, as I mentioned elsewhere, I always attempted to disguise or discreetly wipe off part of my name. In other words, I aimed to make my name sound like Karabıyık instead, which translates as Black Mustache. Although my brother, who currently resides in Turkey since his move from the United States and having married in Turkey, used that name due to the absolute need to camouflage his true identity in the guise of a proper and native citizen of the country to survive the harsh political climate. I am certain that he would not feel ashamed to use his real name in any non-Muslim countries elsewhere around the world, especially if he discovered the actual format of the intended name. Is it not sad that Armenians have to disguise themselves as if they have committed the greatest crime of the century, even to this day? Worse still is that they often feel embarrassed with their Turkish-sounding names when they are living in overseas countries, and many Armenians I have met in Europe, the South Americas, and Australia feel the same. Hannah More's words contain much-needed wisdom. Forgiveness is the economy of the heart. Forgiveness saves the expense of anger, the cost of hatred, the waste of spirits. However, neither Turks nor Armenians care about this wisdom when they express their feelings towards each other, similar to the Jewish attitude towards the Nazi era, although we cannot compare the Jewish with others. We also seem to discover this kind of behavior in different societies all around the world. As long as this is fostered further amongst humans, there can be no ideal advancement. The "I am better than you are, and I have got better things than you have" mentality has failed humanity. Going back to my train of thought, after Edita and Robert returned to Australia, there were more opportunities for me to visit places, and there was finally a feeling of discovery in the air. That provided the excitement and enthusiasm needed to get to know the traditions of the locals a little better. What got my absolute attention was that native Filipinos in general were exceptionally superstitious, and many were overly religious. Muslim Filipinos from the south, on the other hand, were mostly fundamentalists, and as expected, totally in opposition to Christians. The ones I encountered were extremely anti-modernization of the country, fashion, music, and the schooling of traditional Catholic Filipinos. Night markets and entertainment provided by the locals and schools, with their sporting events coinciding with those oft-enjoyed fiestas, were a welcome change. A tourist was always expected to taste and purchase the local produce. It did not matter if they needed it or not. One could easily be befriended with the local population, and this ease of friendliness was very helpful. According to information, they had many fiestas and festivities in the region, especially in Pangasinan. J.P., his close friends and relatives, as well as Tony's associates, shared the experience when we traveled there together. It was certainly easy to become accustomed to living there, but it was also easily possible to get lost in the jungles if one had no friends around. In the south, to survive fundamentalist Muslim pressure, we were advised to constantly sing the Muslim prayer, Allahu Akbar, and hope for the best. In other words, when you are traveling alone, you need some vital survival skills. Before we took a few different routes to other islands visiting Tony's relatives and friends, we visited a region well known to them, where Christian-based faith healers dwelt. It was a small community which chose miracles over medical treatment. There were those from wealthier recesses of the country who were convinced Jesus would heal them better and more effectively. Religious superstitions were extremely ripe. It was exceedingly unnerving to be treated by the locals as if I was the long-expected savior returning just as prophesied. Many were begging me to bless them and remain in their midst a while. This situation would make anybody nervous facing such a predicament. No matter what I tried to explain, as they insisted that I had to be the one expected, a number of those poor people openly declared that as soon as they touched my hands, they felt the healing energies surging, making them whole again. A little knowledge about the Bible was beneficial. Recalling Jesus' words, I spoke to the large group of people gathered there in an authoritative voice. Your faith has healed you. Indeed, if you truly believe and trust in yourself, your positive attitude will help your body heal, for it is remarkably capable of doing so. Be positive and live well. Who knew what Tony thought of the situation? One could only hope that he did not think of me as being someone enjoying all that attention, because it is far from the reality. Although I said little, I could see the need to play the game, especially as the Franciscan sister in charge of the congregation was asking me to play the part, as it was helping the people heal quickly. She had some nursing experience and was cognizant about medical treatments. I told Tony and the sister that I could only play the role in a psychological sense, but could never claim to be who the congregation wanted to believe I was. When this sister asked me to offer the congregation a speech and special blessing, I advised her to introduce me only as a special guest and friend from afar, not as the Lord incarnate. I did not desire anyone witnessing this occasion to think of me either being very religious, as someone really very special, as the locals wished to think, or others like Tony who might be thinking that I was influencing the gathered by using some form of charm to worship me. Although my ex-wife and daughters were very keen to consider my every move of being extraordinarily friendly with people under such light, it was amplified with the childish fabrications both my daughters liberally expressed. They were excited with their mother's naive nature, and none of them wanted to know the real truth. No, I do not use magic or charms to influence people. My only charm is, smile, and the world will smile with you. Being a very down-to-earth individual interested in only logical explanations and scientific truths, not following myths or any religious dogma, I had to make a few verbal adjustments, realizing that people were so desperate in receiving either medical or financial assistance that they resorted to believing in divine providence to assist them. If that assumption was correct, and what they hoped for made them happy, they should continue with what they wanted to believe in. But I could not, under any circumstances, encourage people to adore me or put me on top of a pedestal, as some others selling shadows would do. Upon entering the chapel, one discovered so many people trying to occupy a prominent seat in the front, probably hoping they were going to get the maximum benefit from the blessings of the Lord. One found people being extraordinarily excited about the divine energies which were to heal them from the variety of ills inflicting them, but in actual fact, the entire healing session was to help the congregation recover from their sins. They talked very loudly with each other about their family and friends, some bitterly crying, and others filling the air with their laughter. One could hear a number of dialects when hearkening, and discovered that they almost always mentioned this being their only hope. In fact, this has been so emphasized when the sister in charge spoke of it to us. However, I felt that some were there purely out of curiosity, like me. Edita, too, showed great interest in this kind of healing, due to being involved in many other religious, philosophical, and even cult-based movements previously. She had tried mind research, Scientology, the Mormons, and even Jehovah's Witnesses. Parapsychology and spiritualism remained her major interests in search of the real meaning behind falling in love, as she put it. Lately she was delving into Sufism, because a young Middle Eastern gentleman she had met recently was into it. One wonders how people survive the ordeal after being involved in such a variety of belief systems, which were at best completely in opposition to each other. They were probably totally confused about what to believe, or simply gave up believing in anything. It was interesting to see seemingly well-educated people searching Christian or Muslim values in their many forms of belief. Edita's upbringing must have carried more weight, and like many others from that part of the world, she remained superstitious. When I discovered her counting rice grains, which had to be the exact number as her known sins, wrapping them up in a thin piece of rice paper, she declared that it was to burn one's sins away. Tony, with one of his female servants, Edita and I went to attend that congregation before her departure. On arrival, a huge crowd of people were pushing through the entry so that they could be first to go to the front or back of the chapel. Just like Edita, others with the same aim and purpose went to the back room, where helpers were assisting individuals to burn their sins properly over the candle flame. This process and incense sticks created a smoke-laden atmosphere in all parts of the large hall. Mixed with the camphor jelly that rubbed on the outer extremities of all visitors, the air became very hard to breathe in, but nobody complained. Edita softly whispered that we could say nothing about this. We had to endure it, and soon we would become accustomed. It was fascinating to observe people burning their sins, thinking they could now go home and enjoy the bliss of being sinless again. I was unsure if they were also attempting to burn other sins they might still commit. I suppose one may need to leave it to the experts. The rear wall was completely blackened with candle and burning rice soot. Camphor mixed in coconut oil, rubbed all over the bodies of the gathered, created a strong aroma, and fumes were burning people's eyes. But the effect was apparently because of the healing energies being present. The congregation was not stirred by it, for their hope of being healed by God, His good spirits, and particularly by the good Lord, was stronger. Although the back of both my ankles were very painful and bleeding, I said nothing and kept it to myself. Eventually, the bleeding stopped. I can almost hear you ask what had happened. While we were climbing the hill to reach the top, where the small chapel stood, I stepped on a very fine wire mesh in several layers on the ground, which I could not see, for it was well camouflaged, and which was never mentioned by anybody, or they might not have been aware of its existence. Obviously, it had been laid down to stop the Japanese soldiers in their tracks during the fierce times of war. Who knows, perhaps there were also unexploded bombs around. I suppose I was the unlucky one, and while others of the group were advancing, I was struggling to free my ankles from the very fine mesh of thin wire cutting deep into my skin. As I removed them, my ankles kept bleeding very heavily, and I had to leave them like that, hoping that the fresh wounds would be at least cleaner. If I had some salt, I could have applied it to my cuts to speed up the healing process, but all I could do was ignore my pain and hope for the best. When I finally arrived at the entry to the chapel, Edita and Tony were already inside and had not noticed I was missing. When they applied camphor on our lower legs and feet, without realizing my dilemma, the pain I felt just behind my ankles was unendurable. The bleeding had stopped before my entry, yet I strongly felt the burning, and being very determined, I said nothing to anyone as I sat one of the chairs in the large hall. I did not think that anybody would take any note of my newly inflicted pain anyway. If I could at least disinfect them, it would be helpful. There was minor swelling, and no pus or inflammation was present, but I developed small lumps in those parts of my ankles, which lasted for a long while afterwards. In the hall, we were asked to take off our socks and shoes so that the helpers could rub some more of their special healing oils all over our feet and legs. I was once again in agony when they applied coconut oil with camphor on my wounds. They were burning, but I still said nothing, simply enduring the experience, which lasted for only a short while. Thanks to my tolerance level to pain being reasonably high, I did not want to scream, although I could do so, at the same time hoping that the cuts behind my ankles would not become inflamed. Eventually I made mention of why I had arrived a little later than they did, but neither responded to me. It was as if I was talking a different language and not understood. When Edita and her brother went to the back room to burn their sins over the candle flame, as per their common traditions, I remained seated in the main hall. I was fascinated how people were eagerly hoping and indeed expecting to become better and healthier. I filmed the entire session with permission from the sister in charge and congregation. She later invited me to her private chambers behind the altar to talk to her and her helpers. they eagerly asked me to talk to the congregation and offer them a blessing. I was shocked by that unexpected invitation, but was prepared for any surprises. I accepted the challenge. It was obvious that they all wanted to hear the Master speak and bless them according to their tradition. She and her helpers preached first, talking about the greatness of the Lord Jesus, and that whoever believed in him would be healed. They spoke mainly in their native tongue, and occasionally in what they called Taglish, Tagalog, and English. More camphor and coconut oil was applied to people's arms and legs. More incense smoke filled the air, and her voice rang within the vast hall. Then came my turn to talk to them, and I kept my words short and simple, for everything I was saying needed to be interpreted into their language. There was a lull when I spoke to them, pointing to what Jesus had been teaching in the New Testament. Your faith heals you. Trust, and it will be. Be positive and believe in yourselves. May whatever you believe in to be your guiding light, and have faith. You will all be well again, because you want to, and I also want you to be well and remain healthy. I made my point clear that I was not going to follow the old tradition. Therefore, I was not going to make the usual sign of the cross. But if they wanted, they could do whatever they desired to. Someone in the audience exclaimed, "But Lord, it is our duty and need, not yours. Pray for us." Can one imagine what a shock it was for me? To me it appeared like theatrics, but I could not see me pretending to be their Lord, nor could I allow it to be seen that way. I told them to remember the words of Holy Jesus, and he was the authority, in order to make them realize I was not who they considered. This showed me how desperate people felt, having to endure the harsh climate humanity has created. It was sad. They all begged me to offer them a special blessing, and I spoke a few more words about what I felt in regard to how we should consider God, for God had to be a God of love and not of fear. When I was once again seated next to Edita, she told me, "You see, this healing system is very logical. It is not superstitious, and it is not faked." I wondered what she meant by that, for it was not really clear. Was counting rice grains to the amount of one's sins, placing them in rice paper, and burning away one's sins over a candle flame any different? However, Edita often presented a certain behavior towards me, which anyone with a little logic could interpret as it was meant, declaring loud and clear, "You would not understand this well-sophisticated superiority on our part anyway." She had to be the only well-cultured and educated person, knowing all things. Perhaps by belittling others and looking down on them was a good way to promote one's own superiority, but I might have been wrong thinking this way. However, to let Edita have her own thrills, I preferred to say nothing, and behaved as if I was still in need to learn, hoping it would please her immensely. In fact, anyone who claims to know everything knows nothing. The wise realize that there is so much more yet to be known. Looking at me as if I was a complete ignoramus, she said, "What I am doing now is so important to please our Lord, so that unlike a few others, one can live sinless. Perhaps I needed to do the same to become sinless again. But in the Christian sense, the role of Christ in forgiving our sins would be nullified if becoming sinless was so easily done by wrapping them in rice paper." However, when further analyzing the superstition displayed by the locals, one could see the logic in this. The whole theatrics was, in reality, to teach them not to dwell on their old mistakes any more, in a very pleasant way they could easily follow, and look forward to new vistas in their lives. Since I was not so supremely knowledgeable and wise in the eyes of someone like Edita, I decided to keep completely silent about this issue, for I have experienced such attitudes from others, like my ex-wife before. It was also the kind of wisdom which Edita loved, often exclaiming about her mother's teachings. For example, as I have already mentioned, washing one's hands after a long day's work, when one might be very sweaty, was a dangerous thing to do, even before cooking or preparing meals. Just imagine if you worked on a pig farm and now needed to prepare your evening meal without washing your hands. But Edita had a solution for that also, as she uttered, "Our Lord told us that what goes into the mouth does not spoil us, and only what comes out of it." What was coming out of her mouth when she spoke to me without any respect? I say again, it was fascinating to note that I had to learn all about such sophistication from a highly cultured person knowing all things. At home, I was constantly told not to worry about cooking, as she would do so when she came back from work, but I often needed to consume something before her arrival in order to leave cooking and preparation of meals to her. But the delicacies her friends prepared were far superior, for they were both traditional and delightful, and did not follow the tradition of not washing one's hands before handling food. This change in behavior from her was indicative of her regret about me not being as she originally hoped. Let me take you back to the healing session once more, where one observed people with desperate needs. In this sad atmosphere, they presented a middle-aged gentleman whose both eyes were apparently blind, and covered with thick cotton wool. I could see the oozing teardrops on the sides of his cheeks, and the sister asked me specifically to record what she needed to do this time as part of his ongoing treatment. She partially removed the cotton wool coverings from his eyes, and under instruction his eyes remained closed. She lifted the upper eyelids so that she could inject a white solution into his eyes. What I have observed, as can also be seen in the video images, was like lubricating or cleansing procedure, and the cotton wool packs were put back in their previous position. When analyzing the video images later, one could see that the needles were not inserted into his eyeballs. According to the sister, he needed a few more sessions like this. Maybe it was a simple case of conjunctivitis needing to be treated with an antibiotic solution. After this delicate treatment, I was asked to bless the poor man so that his eyesight could be restored quickly. I was expected to put my hands on his head when blessing him, and when I did so, he started to cry. Uttering a prayer, he said, "The Lord has touched me. I have sinned, the Lord. Have mercy on your servant." His faith was very strong, and fully trusting that the Lord was going to heal his blindness. When there is no apparent hope, people stick to all kinds of measures. I reminded him of Jesus' words, "Your faith has healed you," and advised him further, "When you wash your face with pure cold water next time, you might be surprised." People observing this kept praying and thanking the Lord, while also making the sign of the cross. That man believed that he had sinned against the Lord, and therefore he was stricken with blindness, bypassing all possible natural causes. I could not wait to see him happy with his restored eyesight. A woman was presented to me who was in absolute agony after having a double cystectomy, but the medical procedure she went through may have been a botched job. I was not sure whether it was due to cancer or the removal of implants. However, seeing a woman in this state was heart-wrenching. Obviously, she had no means to be treated properly, and was therefore putting all her hopes in the Lord. The sister offered prayers and blessings to her when she heard my voice, although I did not speak in Tagalog, and in her dialect, she shouted as it was interpreted to me, "My Lord, my Lord! Surely I'm hearing the voice of my Lord. Bless me, Lord." When she saw me, she forgot her excruciating pain and wanted to get down to kiss my feet, but I could not accept this act of worship. I told her in a whisper that I was not who they thought I might be. I was only a visitor from the down-under land. Many did not take any note of what was being said, once again proving how desperate some people are. As can be seen from this occasion, which was also clearly recorded at the time, the lady in question later claimed her pains were miraculously eased for the very first time ever. After a few more people with various problems had been treated and prayed over by the sister and congregation, there was an intermission. We waited for a while longer, everybody in the church hall expecting the sister and her helpers to come out and continue with the program. But one of her assistants came out, specifically asking me if I could see the sister in her chambers, just behind the altar. Feeling obliged, I went in to see her. She was extraordinarily exhausted, and her helpers were gathered around, praying for her recovery. She had clearly passed out, or was deeply asleep. It was so clear that they wanted my input towards her speedy healing. Some were attempting to prostrate on the floor in front of me, others saying, "You are the Lord in disguise," or at least, "You represent him." How could one react to this? It was puzzling. I told them to distance themselves and stand in a circle closer to the walls, and extended my arms over her sleeping body as I did once in Perth with Merva after her car accident. I felt, or so I thought, that there was some form of energy building up, and interestingly, all together therein felt something electrical in that instant. I cannot or will ever claim to be a miracle worker, but I know there are so many thought energy-based unknowns. This has nothing to do with spirituality, faith, or any belief in the Lord, but in something unique and universal. It is something physically available to all humanity, something we are a part of. I have directly experienced it, but have no explanation for it other than the existence of a possible portal into another time and dimension. I closed my eyes, visualizing her getting better, her health fully restored, and her body being energized with universal energies. I have seen her, in my mind, getting up healthy and more alive than ever before. Again, it felt as if I was transported into a healing or recovery room with the person in need to recover. Then I suggested that her helpers leave the room with me for about 20 minutes, and she would wake up completely restored. I even asked one of them to announce to the congregation that the sister was well again, and would soon come out to see them. Edita and her brother remained seated in the hall, probably absorbed with the whole experience. Just as I suggested, the sister got up, fully recovered, and spoke to the congregation. Her healthier self was apparent. She spoke about how the Lord worked wonderful miracles, and offered a prayer and blessing, and thanked me for the healing session. She suggested that we must celebrate this tomorrow with the usual people, and said we were to have real fun. Edita was thrilled, but remained completely speechless about my position, for such a lot of attention was being given to me, the foreigner, as she declared, by her behavior. It was not my desire to gather worshippers anywhere around the world. Although she did not say anything, one could see her ardent wish that I received a lot less attention. The next day we attended that specially planned celebration, and people brought many things, including food items, to share with each other. Many coins were collected and mixed with large amounts of rice, which was to be dropped from the roof of a large tin shed to the people down below as a blessing from the good Lord, and to assist the needy at the end of this ceremonial occasion. I took part in it, and also extremely cautiously dropped money and rice grains to people, which either I or the sister have filmed using my video camera. The large crowd was so happy to receive this great blessing as they considered. If I was able to make people feel happy on that occasion, I would also feel very happy. Even if it was nothing more than offering a piece of bread to the poor, or a comforting word or two, which made them think positively about themselves, it would make me feel fulfilled. Just to see people smile makes me feel good, for I know that I am surrounded with joy and happier thoughts when they are happy. In truth, we can all be surrounded with positive thoughts if and when we so desire. It is one of the nicest things in life, wanting to be happy and healthy, no matter what life circumstances are like. Unfortunately, there are also people who prefer to remain with thoughts of doom and gloom, constantly wrapping themselves in negative energies. That in itself is destructive to life and man's progression. The sister was more than willing to help me capture some of the scenery while I offered coins and rice to the needy. Then somebody from the crowd approached me, saying in part American, "You have to be the Blessed One. We have seen that bag being all empty, but you are giving us more than what was inside it." "You have special gifts," said the sister. "Look how happy they all are." Later, seeing me allegedly blessing these poor people on video was very emotional when I watched it back home. One could see how much appreciated my visit was, but although present at the time, Edita's behavior and facial expressions decried otherwise. She looked totally disgusted with the special reception I was given. Without any prejudice, and only observing her facial expressions and attitude, it was evident that she obviously did not desire to see me getting such attention. I hoped that Tony did not think of me as an attention seeker. I did not desire to be misunderstood, for I never wished to be put on a pedestal, to be adored forever, and have never attempted to do so. I felt a great need to talk to him about this issue, and explain that these people would react to someone else similarly. He appeared to see my point of view. However, he said softly, "But you are still different. Maybe the good Lord has chosen you. Look how happy they are." Edita's behavior following that event spoke volumes. One could almost read her thoughts. They were so blatantly obvious. How was it at all possible for someone like him, who had visited those people for the very first time ever, to be immediately accepted by them and given such high respect? Surely he could not have deserved it. Who did he think he was, making himself the center of attention? Why was somebody like him, without the higher cultural background like us, so important? Was this state of her observed attitude due to my supposedly owing her money she hoped I would give her then and there? I suppose I had to remain the low grade, not as highly intelligent, and probably even an untrustworthy person she might have preferred to think of me, and someone not paying her personal bills, as hoped. I had a very downgrading lecture session from Edita before this trip, which she conveniently forgot, but perhaps she was remembering it now, for I had delayed a certain payment demanded of me, due to my inability to work from home, as she advised me that her house should not be used like a workshop or studio, even though initially it was her suggestion that I could do so if I moved in. All these thoughts spoilt the scene, once more making me feel uneasy and regretful about this trip. It was a very sad state I did not want to dwell on for long. One could not help but think that she felt very disappointed with her endeavor of luring someone naive enough to fall into her trap. She needed someone to take care of all the other expenses of her new home, such as laying carpets or buying Japanese-style furniture, apart from paying her bills. After waiting for such a long time and nothing was happening, she was disillusioned, very unhappy with me. Therefore, the attention given to me on this occasion was a little too much, as far as she was concerned. No matter how much she tried to deny the situation, and no matter how I avoided thinking like this, I could not help myself from considering the facts in the face of realities I directly experienced. Repeating my words, if what I was doing or saying to these people was helping them feel better, I would feel fulfilled and happy. I suppose Edita might have been thinking that somebody from the local community or race, like her for instance, would be better. Someone of a lower grade like me, as some people popularly considered, as it was by my ex-wife and now by Edita, should not have been in my position, let alone being noticed under any circumstances. I just had to be someone who was lacking in intelligence and finesse. I could not understand why I had to be treated like this. Recalling the times I wasted when I was forced into being associated with Jehovah's Witnesses, was there anything to learn from it? I do not wish to judge others wrongly and always wish to see beauty in people, but in this instance I could not ignore the plethora of non-verbalized words streaming from her mind. I could not disregard her facial expressions and body language, but I was going to ignore it once again and attempt to forget it for the moment, although I wished that my observations were not completely right. However, later events after my return home forced me to conclude that my interpretations were right all along. Certain elements of emotional dullness observed about her person suggested that perhaps we were dealing with some other important issues without naming them. While still in the Philippines, I could not help but ignore her ungainly attitude. A short while later, it was suggested that I visit a place where a certain heavenly phenomena occurred, when Mother Mary and Lord Jesus made appearances, and pilgrims from all over the country frequented the area to witness the event. Large crowds were gathered, leaving no room even to breathe, and we needed to walk quite a distance over a winding pathway. On arrival, we discovered memorabilia and religious paraphernalia being sold in a tightly packed marketplace, with many sellers hoping to make some money. The blessed water was yet another novelty here. Many came to wash themselves in the holy water, believing they were going to be freed of all their troubles and sicknesses. Others preferred to obtain bottles of it to take to their relatives, and yet others chose to drink it for its healing properties. I was asked to stand where Jesus and Mother Mary made appearances in the sky. Some asked me to describe the energies I felt when standing there, and a few others looking in my direction attempted to bow in reverence, making the sign of the cross. As I walked down, some people approached asking me to bless them. Others wanted to take pictures of me with their small cameras, although I specifically asked them not to. Tony approached me, saying, "Before many more people come here to see you, it is better that we leave this place soon." There were others who were selling alleged images of the heavenly phenomena to the pilgrims and curious visitors. Imagine now what those people with some manipulative means could do if they would have taken my image. I believe some had already done so. I was happy to have witnessed people with so much hope in their hearts. They were at least uniting with their ideals. I was happy to leave the holy grounds, as I did not want to be put on a pedestal due to my exotic appearance and personality, as I have often been described. Later that day, and on the following one, we went to see the oil-crying statues of the Madonna and the Christ, and were offered sweet-smelling oil, which became solidified after several days. They normally offered small pieces of cotton wool in plastic bags to people, but we received special attention. Those cotton wool pieces were usually dipped into the holy oil. If people so wished, they could rub them over the uncomfortable parts of their bodies and expect a miraculously speedy recovery from their inflictions. Tony told me that in the past he has felt the immediate benefit of using those cotton pieces after applying them to his forehead, and the excruciating pain was no more. I thought that maybe one could use it for its pseudo-medicinal effects on people back home. In relation to this occasion, I was asked to visit a holy shrine, which in truth was a large grotto attached to the front of a house, and to pray for the speedy recovery of a young man who was paralyzed from neck to toe, and had been bedridden for a long while. Visitors were often encouraged to offer donations to his family living in the house. This lad had been electrocuted during his schooling at one of the university campuses while studying electrical engineering. Upon their discovery of my visiting the grotto, they immediately invited me in, and I went in with Tony, who was asked to sit in the family room with them, while I was requested as a special guest to enter that young man's room and offer him blessings. Sadly, he was lying there, motionless, and I was told I could talk to him in English, and that he would understand me well. Alas, once again, it was so clear that I was the hoped-for or expected one, making an appearance in their midst, and therefore a single word from me would heal him. They were desperately begging me to bless him and the entire family. Feeling obliged, but happily, I spoke to him about psychologically important and very positive issues, encouraging him never to give up hope, and he might be surprised. He smiled. Seeing him smile for the very first time since the devastating accident, his mother and sisters shouted in excitement. He has never been able to smile other than just staring at the ceiling. As I was leaving his room, we all heard him shout, calling his mother, "Mother, please bring me some water." They were all filled with awe and shouted in excitement, "We have seen the miracle of the Lord this day." Then they brought a little baby crying bitterly and asked me to put my hands on the baby and he would be healed. I put my hands on the tiny head of the little one, caressing him gently, and the baby looked up at me smiling and giggling. All the screaming ceased. They said the doctor was unable to help the child, and I was apparently the only one who could. I did not know what was ailing the poor baby, but was immensely happy when he was healthy again. They all raised their voices as in a choir. "The Lord has touched us again." Another said, "You must be the one, for you have cured the inoperable ill of the child." A few more people began to make appearances, and many more were staring through the windows. I was in shock and astounded when an old lady with a bald head approached me, asking others in the house to bring her wig. While putting it on, she said a few words in their native tongue, while another interpreted, saying, "She wants your blessing too." I put my hands on top of the wig, and the old lady too shouted with great joy, attempting to get down to her knees to kiss my feet, which I could not allow, and invited us for a feast. Tony, witnessing the event, looked surprised, as if he had seen something miraculously unexpected. They offered us fruit juice and wanted us to remain as their special guests to dine with them, but we declined. While going home, I told Tony that obviously people needed to hear some comforting words to boost their trust, and they were certainly generating very positive energies there. All the people who had met us wanted me to return and bless them again in the name of the Great One. After the demanded blessing session, the elderly lady got up and went into their kitchen, leaving the gathered feeling utterly excited and praising the Lord. One told us that she had not been able to walk for a long while, and now look what has happened. If I have been able to make these people think positively about themselves, and if it has helped them in any way, I can do naught else other than feel happy. I thought that Tony may have felt uneasy about the attention we received, but they were also thanking him for bringing his good friend to bless them. Hopefully it made him feel good as well. When we left, we could still hear people utter words like, "It is a miracle! It is a miracle of the Lord!" I certainly did not expect a reception like this anywhere, particularly in a country like the Philippines, and the shock I have experienced would probably last for a while. By visiting people and experiencing something as unexpected as this, I wondered if I have been the catalyst towards an event which might somehow have helped people overcome their problems. However, I could not pretend to be the second coming. It was time to move on.